class in the world. It's Thursday, April the 30th, and this morning we had our last class meeting of the semester, wrapping up with a few thoughts this week on the end of the Cold War. And so as you're preparing for your final exam, here are just a few things to be mindful of, or themes that you'll want to make sure that you can explain in some level of detail. This week, we began with some discussion of what life was like for people living in the time of the Cold War, and some of the ways in which sort of the cultural unrest of the 60s and 70s was an expression of sort of living under the tension of the Cold War environment. So we talked a little bit about like the student protest movement, the counterculture, and the women's rights movements. So think of those as examples of sort of a ferment of culture and an unrest within culture in this Cold War era. And then we transitioned from there to talking a bit about sort of the reasons why the Cold War ends in the way in which it does. And we said that you can point to a number of very specific reasons that lead ultimately to the collapse of the Soviet Union. In particular, we said there was an economic crisis that no one really understood in terms of its severity, but that was obviously a contributing factor. There was this unwinnable war in Afghanistan. There was the labor unrest in Poland with the movement called Solidarity. And then there was what we called instability at the top, a rapid succession of leaders with different personalities and different visions, and therefore, in this lack of consistency, the Soviet Union started to sort of fray at the edges. It was that unrest, we said, that brought Gorbachev to power, and Gorbachev, we said, was a very different kind of leader for the Soviet Union in his relationship to the people, in his willingness to compromise. So we talked about glasnost and perestroika and Gorbachev's efforts to sort of withdraw the Soviet Union from its global commitments, and how these reforms of intellectual openness and of sort of economic restructuring, much like the Prague Spring back in 1968, produced this sort of swelling tide that becomes the uprisings of 1989 throughout Eastern Europe, and then moving from there into the Soviet Union in the early 1990s. So that, of course, by the time you got to 1991 and the actual resignation of Gorbachev and the dissolution of the Soviet Union, it has basically already ceased to exist. We transitioned then today to sort of talking in broad brushstrokes about sort of the shape of the world as it has emerged, and trying to sort of highlight especially the different perspectives of Fukuyama and Huntington as ways of thinking about whether the world is moving towards increased unity, liberty, and equality, or whether we're moving in a direction of greater division, conflicts, and tension. Those things will be probably a relatively small part of the exam, but hopefully useful ways for you to think about the world in which you find yourself living today. So thanks everybody for a good semester. Good luck with that final exam preparation. I look forward to seeing you next week.